Every time a fly lands on your food, you probably have the same thought: get it off. That animal you just swatted away is holding up one of the most important biological processes on the planet. The common housefly is the second most important pollinator on Earth after bees, one of the most efficient decomposers in nature. Its larvae produce fertilizer more potent than cow manure, and it's been doing all of this for 65 million years, since before the first primates existed. It's also the most hated animal on the planet. More than spiders, more than cockroaches, more than snakes. We have spent the entire history of human civilization trying to wipe it out. And not only have we failed, without it, we wouldn't survive either. Today, we're going to look at one differently. Get closer. A fly resting on the rim of a glass looks like a minor problem, an annoyance, something to chase away. Stop. Look closely. The strangest thing about a fly isn't its eyes, it's its feet. Each leg ends in tiny pads covered in thousands of microscopic hairs that secrete an adhesive fluid. That's what lets a fly walk across a ceiling, across glass, across any surface at any angle. Engineers have spent decades trying to replicate that mechanism for climbing robots. The best they've managed are partial approximations, but those feet do something else. They contain chemoreceptors, taste sensors. A fly samples everything it touches before deciding whether to stay. When it walks across your food, it isn't contaminating it randomly. It's running a chemical analysis, deciding if it's worth the visit. What looks like an invasion is, in fact, an assessment. The sense of smell is even more remarkable. A fly's antennae can detect chemical compounds in the air at concentrations no instrument we've ever built can match. From over a kilometer away, a fly can smell rotting matter, ripe fruit, or the sugar you left on the counter 3 hours ago. It doesn't see your kitchen. It smells it before it arrives. The wings beat between 200 and 300 times per second. A hummingbird, which we consider one of the fastest wing beaters in the animal world, manages between 50 and 80. The fly triples it. That buzz we find so irritating is a biological engine running at a frequency no part of our body can reach. And it only has 2 functional wings. The rear pair has evolved into halters, small club-shaped organs that vibrate at the same frequency as the wings and act as biological gyroscopes, feeding the fly real-time data about its orientation in space. Without them, it can't fly. With them, it executes evasive maneuvers in milliseconds that would embarrass a military drone. Aerospace engineers have studied this system for decades. What they've found is a flight control mechanism with an energy efficiency they still can't replicate. There's a detail in that worth pausing on. A fly changing direction mid-air doesn't think about it. There's no decision. The halters feed data directly into the motor system, and the correction happens before anything resembling thought could occur. It's a closed loop running faster than consciousness. A reflex so deeply embedded that it looks, from the outside, like magic. There's something that sets the housefly apart from almost any other insect: its relationship with us. Unlike most insects, the housefly doesn't live in the wild by choice. It lives where we live. It warms itself with our heat, eats what we eat. It has co-evolved with our species across our entire history, so adapted to our environment that it struggles to survive without human settlements nearby. We are its habitat, and without anyone asking it to, it became one of the most efficient waste processors we've ever had. There are 125,000 species of fly in the world. The housefly is just one, but it's the one that has lived closest to us for the whole of our history as a species. It has inhabited every human settlement, every city, every market, every battlefield. It followed our legions, our caravans, our ships. It has watched entire civilizations rise and fall. And it's been doing this for 65 million years. In that time, it survived the extinction that killed the dinosaurs, 3 ice ages, volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky for years. It has also survived us. The most powerful insecticides we've ever synthesized, 20th century national eradication campaigns, decades of chemical warfare waged in domestic kitchens around the world. Homo sapiens has been on Earth for around 300,000 years. The fly has been here for 65 million. We are the newcomers. And it didn't survive despite being small. It didn't survive by accident. It survived because of what it does. Picture a field. A deer has died. 100 kilograms of organic matter on the ground. Within 10 minutes, the first fly is already there. It didn't see it. It smelled it. Its antennae picked up the compounds released by decaying flesh from over a kilometer away. It arrives, assesses, and lays between 100 and 150 eggs directly onto the carcass. Within 24 hours, those eggs become larvae. And then something begins that the human eye can't see. But that is one of the most important processes taking place in any terrestrial ecosystem. Fly larvae have no eyes, no legs. They are essentially digestive tubes with a single function: consume organic matter as fast as possible. They don't need to hunt. They don't need to search. They only need to be where the dead matter is. And the adult fly makes sure they get there. A single larva consumes the equivalent of its own body weight in organic matter every hour. A colony can reduce that deer to clean bone in under a week. Without flies, that deer would take months to decompose. The nutrients it contains would stay locked in, inaccessible to the soil. The pathogens that thrive in dead flesh would accumulate unchecked. What the fly resolves in days, nature without it would take months to process. But the truly impossible fact isn't the speed. It's what happens to what they consume. Larvae don't just break things down. They transform them. What they excrete is extraordinarily rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Exactly the three elements plants need to grow. Gram for gram, one of the most potent fertilizers in nature. More concentrated than cow manure. More bioavailable than most of the synthetic fertilizers used in industrial agriculture. The deer disappears. And in its place, the soil around it becomes more fertile than it was before the animal died. Death feeds life. The fly is the mechanism that makes that transfer possible. Every carcass it processes, every nutrient it returns to the soil, is an investment in the next cycle. The plants that grow in that enriched soil will produce fruit eaten by animals that will one day die and be processed by the larvae of the next generation of flies. A cycle that has been running for 65 million years. Now there are startups that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars on a single idea, doing this at industrial scale. Breeding fly larvae in controlled facilities, feeding them worthless organic waste, and extracting the fertilizer and protein they produce. The fly you swat out of your kitchen is at the center of one of the fastest growing sectors in biotechnology. The investors of Silicon Valley have arrived at the same conclusion that has been obvious for 65 million years. The fly larva is one of the most efficient biological machines in existence. Picture an industrial kitchen. Tons of organic waste, peelings, food scraps, harvest residue, that in most agricultural systems worldwide end up in landfill with no value at all. Fly larvae convert that waste into high-quality protein and fertilizer in days. No land, little water, no significant emissions. No other biological or industrial process can do that with the same efficiency. Biologists have run the numbers. If flies stopped functioning as decomposers for a single year, the organic matter that would accumulate unprocessed would be equivalent to several years of global agricultural production. It's not that the cycle would slow down, it would stop. And the soil that holds everything together would start dying from below. A cow dies in a field. Nobody comes. A week passes. The body is intact. Pathogens multiply. The smell carries for kilometers. The animals that would normally feed on the remains don't approach. The infection risk is too high. 2 weeks. The soil beneath the carcass begins to saturate. The nutrients it should be releasing stay locked inside. The ground around it grows poorer instead of richer. A month. What should be a cycle of regeneration becomes a dead end. An accumulation. A problem with no solution in sight. In the ecosystems of Europe alone, tens of millions of wild animals die every year. Managing that biomass, converting all that dead matter into nutrients available to the soil, depends largely on decomposing insects, with flies at the head of the list. It's an ecological service that appears in no budget, has no name in everyday language, and that we take entirely for granted every time we walk across fertile ground or eat a piece of fruit. Now multiply that by every animal that dies in every ecosystem on the planet every single day. That's the world without flies. But there's something else almost nobody mentions when they talk about flies: pollination. Flies are the second most important pollinator on the planet after bees. They pollinate more than 100,000 plant species, including crops that directly feed human beings. Cacao is the best-known example. The cacao fly, a tiny dipteran, is the only pollinator that can access the cacao flower, which is so small and so enclosed that bees can't get in. Without that fly, there's no pollination. Without pollination, there's no cacao. No chocolate, yes, but also no income for millions of farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Indonesia, and Ecuador whose livelihoods depend on that crop. A 2-millimeter fly holds up a global industry worth more than $130 billion a year. Silently. Getting into flowers too small for anyone else to enter. They also pollinate carrots, onions, cashews, certain varieties of apple, and dozens of forage plants that feed the livestock we depend on for meat and dairy. A chain that starts with a 1-centimeter insect and ends up on the plate of almost every person on the planet. The reason almost nobody knows this is that flies don't pollinate visibly. They don't build hives. They don't produce honey. There's no beekeeping industry behind them documenting their work. They go where food smells good. And along the way, they make it possible for the world to keep flowering. Flies and their larvae are also food for birds, bats, fish, frogs, and spiders. In ecosystems where fly populations have collapsed from broad-spectrum pesticide use, insect-eating bird populations have collapsed alongside them. In the UK, some farmland bird species have lost more than 50% of their population over recent decades. One of the documented causes: the reduction of insects available as food. A dead fly isn't just one fewer fly. It's less food for the bird that would have eaten it, fewer seeds that bird would have dispersed, fewer plants that would have grown from those seeds. The thread is invisible until it breaks. Ecologists have a name for animals with this profile. They call them keystone species, those whose presence has an outsized impact on an ecosystem relative to their abundance or size. The term is usually applied to wolves, to whales, to elephants, almost never to flies. But if the criterion were applied strictly, the housefly would qualify in almost every terrestrial ecosystem on the planet. There are hospitals where doctors deliberately place live maggots inside their patients' wounds, not by accident, not as a desperate last resort, as a planned treatment, with larvae raised in sterile laboratory conditions approved by the regulatory agencies of dozens of countries. It's called maggot therapy. And what those larvae do is something no modern antibiotic can do with the same precision. They eat only dead tissue, exclusively. They leave healthy tissue untouched. They produce enzymes that dissolve necrotic material, dead cells, but don't react with living tissue. As if they carry a biological sensor that can tell exactly which cells are dead and which aren't. No scalpel, no drug can make that distinction with the same accuracy. And while they remove the dead tissue, they secrete antimicrobial compounds that kill the bacteria in the wound, including some strains resistant to the most powerful antibiotics we have. And they stimulate the growth of new tissue, accelerating healing. A doctor would need to coordinate 3 separate interventions to achieve what a fly larva does alone, in silence, inside a wound. The larvae used in medical therapy aren't flies caught from the environment. They're raised in laboratory conditions of controlled sterility, specifically for clinical use. They're delivered in special dressings that let them work on the wound without the patient having direct contact with them. The process is so precise and so well documented that in many hospitals, it has become the first choice treatment for certain types of chronic wounds, before surgery is attempted. Maggot therapy has a success rate of over 80% in removing necrotic tissue. It's used primarily in diabetic ulcers, chronic wounds, and cases where antibiotics have failed, and the alternative is amputation. There are patients who have kept their limbs because of fly larvae. Limbs they couldn't have kept with any other treatment available. This technique isn't new. Surgeons with Napoleon's army documented in the 19th century that soldiers whose wounds had been colonized by larvae on the battlefield healed better than those whose hadn't. In the First World War, a surgeon named William Baer developed the method systematically after observing the same phenomenon in the trenches. Then antibiotics arrived, and the technique fell out of use. It seemed unnecessary. There's something worth sitting with in that. We spent decades developing increasingly powerful drugs to replace a biological mechanism that had been working for thousands of years. And now, as those drugs start to fail, we look back at the fly larva and find it was never outclassed. It just stopped being fashionable. Now, in the age of antibiotic-resistant superbugs, one of the greatest threats to global health according to the WHO, maggot therapy is returning, not as folklore, as the precision tool that the most advanced pharmaceuticals can't replicate. The animal we instinctively associate with disease has spent centuries healing wounds that conventional medicine can't resolve. Right now, there are approximately 17 million houseflies for every human being on the planet, 17 million animals per person, unknowingly dedicated to keeping the cycles running that make life on this planet possible: decomposing, pollinating, feeding, healing, all at once, without rest, without instructions, without reward. 17 million per person. Throughout the entire history of human civilization, we have tried to exterminate them. Flies' waters, traps, repellents, insecticides, screens, national eradication campaigns. In the 20th century, some governments distributed insecticides at massive scale with the explicit goal of eliminating the housefly from their territories. A housefly goes from egg to reproducing adult in 7 to 10 days. A single pair, under ideal conditions, could produce more than 1 million individuals in a month. What looks like a plague has a more precise scientific name: rapid response system. When organic matter appears, the fly arrives, processes it, and converts it into available nutrients at a speed nothing else can match. It isn't a pest, it's an emergency service. The fly survived all of that. And while it did, it kept working. There's something strange about our relationship with it. It is the only animal on the planet that every culture, in every continent, in every historical period, has considered a pest without exception. And it is also one of the few animals whose absence would make the world as we know it impossible to sustain. We have dedicated centuries of human ingenuity to eliminating something we depend on to survive. It has no intention of being useful, no awareness of the chain of consequences it sets off every time it lays an egg, pollinates a flower, or turns a carcass into fertilizer. It does what it does because it's what it has been doing for 65 million years. And in that time, we have built, without noticing, a civilization that depends on it continuing to do so. Tonight, while the world sleeps, millions of flies will keep converting death into life, processing carcasses in fields you'll never see, pollinating flowers that will bear fruit tomorrow, feeding bats flying in the dark above your city, returning nutrients to the soil that will make next year's harvest possible. They'll do it tomorrow. They did it yesterday. And they've been doing it for 65 million years. We have spent the entire history of human civilization trying to exterminate them. And in all that time, they kept holding up the cycle that makes it possible for us to have something to eat, for fields to stay fertile, for flowers to keep opening. There are few greater ironies in our relationship with the natural world. The animal we have tried hardest to kill is also one of the animals that has done most to keep us alive. With us. Or without us. The closer you look, the stranger the world becomes.